we're now like kind of an old tech company in New Zealand. We're doing 20 this year. Xero's 20th birthday this year.
Yeah, that's
so
amazing.
It's crazy to think about how far it's come from the early days of Sir Rod and the work that he was doing with the founders to where we are today.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and today we have James Bergin joining us from Xero. How are you, James?
Paul, I'm great. Thanks very much for having me.
Great to have you back on the show. It has been...
It's been a minute.
It's 7 or 8, maybe 8 years since
I think so. I was looking back through the archives. I think 2018, I think was the last time I came along and had a chat.
Yeah, well, great to have you back. I don't know if it was last time, but certainly previously you've been at ASB. You're now at Xero. Tell us a little bit about where you fit into this big wide world of tech and what that role is that you do at Xero.
Sure. So at Xero, I look after technology research and advocacy, which is I think I'm in running for one of the longest titles at Xero. It basically means I look at technology, I like to say, beyond the planning horizon. So where are things going out past sort of that 3-year strategy window where I think a lot of organizations look, and what can we do to shape the future that we prefer. And then the advocacy part is I get to spend time talking with accountants and bookkeepers and people in small business all around the world. It's definitely the highlight of the job. And just exploring what they're doing, the challenges that they're rising up to, and how Xero can help.
Fantastic. Well, great to catch up again. Looking forward to delving in. We've got some local New Zealand news topics, some global ones, and definitely a chance to sort of delve into more of what's happening in your world and Xero. Of course, very big announcement over the last few days in terms of Xero and Anthropic, so looking forward to delving into that. But before we jump in, big thank you to our show partners, One New Zealand, 2 Degrees, Spark, Workday, Fortinet, and Gorilla Technology. Really appreciative of their support. That keeps the show going, and for their broader contributions to the New Zealand tech and innovation ecosystems. So delving in on the New Zealand front, really the big one over the last few days, and I heard this while I was travelling. Halter have raised another round of venture capital. This time a Series E round. $377 million was the number that Halter have mentioned, or $220 million US, led by Peter Thiel's Founders Fund, and valuing Halter now at $2 billion US, or depending on which day you look at it, around the $3.5 billion New Zealand level, which is just astounding growth that we've seen from Halter. And I think now that puts it very, very high up any sort of rankings of agri-tech companies around the world. So incredible result there for Craig and the team at Halter.
Definitely. I mean, they're such an awesome company as well. And it's one of those things where I'm sure it's fashionable for people now to say, I was a fan of Halter before they were cool, before they were a unicorn. I remember seeing them a number of years back in I think it was like an Ice House event, and just being really blown away about what a great way to take a thing which is something New Zealand has been known for, which is amazing agricultural technology, and then really solving a problem that is a global problem. Like, how do you manage large herds of cattle and other livestock, and all the fences that are involved? I was just so impressed with them, and so to see them getting this round of funding and seeing that kind of valuation is, rewards for some real ingenuity and hard work, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, quite fascinating. And for those that aren't aware, the main thing that Halter known for is their smart collar that is basically worn by the cattle. And this enables a number of things, but one of the key ones is virtual fencing, so that you're able to avoid the costs and the challenges of having to put up fences and then gates and so on to move cattle around. So that's pretty transformative. And then the fact that you've got this technology sitting on one of these collars kind of sitting on each cow. allows, varying sort of health monitoring and sensing. And of course, it's solar powered and it's connected to the internet, so you can be sort of, basically reporting on all of your cows across your herd or herds.
Yeah.
And it's had an incredible, pickup now in the US. So I guess, New Zealand, Australia, US now, and I think growing interest in other parts of the world, but of course the US is an absolutely massive market. So
Yeah, and especially I know
exciting.
that some of their cattle ranches and stuff go for hundreds or thousands, I think in some cases, kilometers, and so you've got this massive space, and so just the sheer logistics of being able to manage that amount of land and where everything roams. I think the team's just done a really great job, and it's really excellent to see that New Zealand's success on the global stage. It's not an easy thing to achieve, and I think that they've done a really, really great job to get to this point.
Yeah, they're saying, used by more than 2,000 farmers and ranchers. That's more the American terminology. Yeah, across the three countries, and they've now sold over 1 million of their solar-powered GPS-enabled collars. Very exciting just to to see this growth, and also I think seeing Founders Fund lead that, who are known for investment in the likes of sort of SpaceX, Facebook, Palantir, Spotify, Airbnb, OpenAI, and they've been involved now in investing, I think, for sort of in the direction of 9 years.
Yeah.
So that's very, very pleasing backing. So great to see.
Excellent. Well done to the team.
Yeah. Now, we've also had the New Zealand High Tech Awards finalists announced in recent days, and of course, Halter are in there with a nomination for the Company of the Year, which is sponsored by PwC alongside Take Communications, Gallagher Group, Dawn Aerospace, Aura, and Aroa Biosurgery. So some really exciting companies. To find out all of the rest of the finalists, jump across to hightech.org.nz. We will include a link in the show notes, and you can see all of the finalists there. And of course, now's not a bad time to be getting your tickets to the awards dinner in Auckland, and if you're from outside of Auckland, get in and get your flights booked and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
so,
it's always amazing. Great evening. And I think, again, looking at those companies, it's one of those things where, like, take something like Dawn Aerospace, for example. It's just these examples where New Zealand ingenuity is really punching above its weight. And, I've been involved in, as you know, Paul, different roles in sort of the innovation ecosystem, or on the periphery of it at least. And to be able to see to see the list of nominees and read more about what they're doing, it's just amazing. And it's this wonderful situation that we have in New Zealand where real innovation can really come from here.
Yeah.
And so it's, congratulations to all the nominees, but I think it'll be a great night, and recommend everyone check it out.
Yeah, and especially for those who haven't been before, it's worth finding a way to get yourself there, because it is so inspiring, and it just opens up a viewpoint on what is happening within the New Zealand tech sector.
Yeah.
There's nothing kind of quite like it. So highly recommended, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, when you check out, we've got, I think, like, there's the Xero High Tech Young Achiever aspect in there as well. But also there's the deep tech stuff. There's the most innovative startup. Check out the nominees, because really, if you're needing a bit of maybe a bit of a pick up in your step, maybe if the week isn't going so well, and you go is there anything positive out there? These kind of companies are doing incredible work, and they're doing it right from here. So it's amazing.
Yeah. And for those that are kind of on, wondering around, investing and so on as well, it's a great place to see sort of, who's coming through. And I think it's also a real encouragement of just how much innovation is going on locally. Also on the New Zealand front, we've got New Zealand's 3G shutdown being completed. So last month it was 2 Degrees who did their 3G switch off, and I guess we heard about that from Stephen Kajaya, I think, on the day that they did the shutdown. Today, 12:01 a.m, Spark NZ switched off their 3G, so that shut down. And of course, One NZ just did their one a week or so back as well. So now it's lights out for 3G.
It's an end of an era.
In New Zealand. So,
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably very much dating myself or aging myself in the sense that I distinctly remember when 3G was turned on, and the first time you saw 3G appearing on your phone, you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It's how fast it is, and compared to where we'd been with 2G and where we'd been with GPRS and those kind of protocols. So to see that we've come to the point where actually we've moved on past 3G now is it's making me feel a little bit old, Paul.
I'll make no comments on that because I can't. It was interesting because I was just in Singapore over the weekend, and I was probably looking at our draft agenda for the podcast, and I was looking at some dates, and interestingly, in Singapore they phased out 3G. I think, at the front of the pack. So theirs was 2024. Oh, wow. So, okay. So we're just kind of, catching up here. So, there's obviously, there's some pros and some cons. There will be some people that have been, caught out and their phone stopped working and they've had to go and get a new device. But, I think in the scheme of it, roughly every decade we see the next generation of mobile network come along, and although it's not perfectly aligned in terms of how they switch off, you could say roughly once a decade, generation of mobile has to turn off as well. And look, this is just part of the digital progress, and I guess there's another topic that we'll maybe come to a little bit later, to do with, if we manage to squeeze it in, to do with older devices that aren't supported, and some of the, there's some cybersecurity risks in there. So there probably is actually a little bit of a silver lining here to encouraging, some folks, although it's got a cost to it, to migrate to newer devices. And then also on the New Zealand front is, of course, the announcement that this week that we've had from the Xero side, which is a partnership between Xero and Anthropic, who are collaborating on real-time financial intelligence. And so I think we'll hold that discussion until we've finished up on the news items, and then kind of get your word what that means from a Xero perspective. I see there's been a bunch of commentary on that already from your chief product officer and technology officer, and from the CEO there as well. So something I think there's a fair bit of interest and excitement on. Yeah. Looking at the global news, big news really for Meta, and especially over the last week. Really on the legal front, and I think this will be really of interest to a lot of parents and families, is, hey, have our social media companies been behaving appropriately? And according to US courts, maybe they haven't been operating appropriately. So, really interesting to see about these court cases. So the first one last week was Meta being told they have to pay $375 million US. This was a trial in New Mexico in regards to child exploitation, and finding that they violated state consumer protection laws by misleading users about Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp safety, which unfortunately sort of has facilitated child sexual exploitation. So that's a pretty big deal. And then quite quickly following that was news that Meta and YouTube ruled negligent in a social media addiction trial in Los Angeles. And although a much smaller amount of money, I think that was $6 million US, so about 10 million in New Zealand terms, these seem like quite landmark results, really. And the word is that there's around another 1,000 court cases that are lined up behind these. So it's not just kind of a little one-off, and there's going to be some pain from paying some bills, because these numbers are actually pretty small when you look at Meta's market cap, which has been in the range of sort of 1.2 to 1.4 trillion US dollars. So 375 million. Yep, painful. $6 million. Yeah. I mean, both of them in the broader scheme, not much. Although I did see a 10% drop in the share price. So if you put that into New Zealand dollar terms, heading towards $250 billion for a 10% drop there. So that a bit more painful. But as we see these things, they tend to bounce back. And also what we see is, a pushback. So these rulings are going to be, going to be challenged.
Yeah.
There's appeals in the works. But if there's 1,000 other cases coming behind them, you've got to imagine this is going to be a time of some rethinking when it comes to how the world looks at social media and video streaming platforms.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a precedent there that's what they'll be wanting to explore and see what that means for the other cases that are coming up. It feels like almost the culmination of a shift, a societal acceptance or concern about some of the nature of these tools. And I think obviously it's about the content that's used on them. But when we look at, Australia passing legislation about under 16-year-olds in social media, the Before 16 group pushing for the same thing here in New Zealand and a number of other jurisdictions around the world, I think it's interesting to see where this lands around the nature of how these platforms have been constructed versus the content that's on them. I think that was the primary defense argument, was they were saying it's not the platforms, it's the content, which is the safe harbor provision that's so often used in the US. So it's a fascinating area to follow because for a while now it feels like the sentiment's been shifting a little bit more to the, hang on a second, are we over our skis a little bit on the use of social media, especially for young people, and what are some of the ramifications? It's not a clear-cut thing in the sense that there's benefits and costs both ways. There's trade-offs no matter which way you play it. So I think it's an area where, less about the money damages and more a matter of what does this mean around precedent and where do things go from here. But I'm with you, Paul. I don't think it's going to be an issue that's just going to disappear. Oh, well, that's those two cases done, and that's all we're going to talk about it. I think there'll be this is just the beginning, really. Yeah,
and I guess what's interesting is this is really leaning into how the products are designed. Obviously, the content is a key part of the picture, but as you say, those in the US, there's always been the safe harbor protection of we don't have responsibility for user created content, but it's how the platform has been designed, and the arguments have been very much, hey, the platform has been designed to be addictive, hence the infinite scrolling, which we didn't used to have on, any form of the technology. You used to scroll through a few items and then you'd get a bit of a pause and you'd go to the next page.
Do you remember there was a cartoon or there was a link that you could pass around to people where it says, you've reached the end of the internet. Okay, go outside and touch some grass. And it was like a kind of a joke image. But there was definitely, I remember reading a study that was talking about the reward mechanisms in the brain are built to reward you dopamine-wise when you see novelty. So if you think about, we're back in times when we're being hunted and if you can hear a rustling in the grass, then your brain goes, well done for hearing that rustling in the grass. So the research was pointing to the 6-second video thing and people just scrolling, and the brain, it had nothing to do with the content and everything to the fact it was new. The next thing was novelty. And so your brain was like wired to give you these dopamine hits. And it was, I think, UK researchers who were looking at trying to break that addiction and giving some of the participants a plain pane of glass that was the shape of a smartphone just so they could have that scrolling mechanism. So there's definitely, I think, us grappling with what have we wrought with this capability and what are some of those trade-offs and where does it fit? And I don't think it's an easy one to answer.
Yeah. And one of the other aspects as well as the scrolling is the autoplay on videos.
Yes,
so and then looking at it from a young person's perspective whose brain prefrontal cortex hasn't fully developed, and the difference in the ability for someone younger to be able to necessarily be as wise at how they manage their time. I think most of us that are a bit older probably are not perfect on this front, and we fall for exactly these things. But we should be old enough and smart enough to maybe make good decisions. But that's not necessarily the case for our youngest folks. So it's fascinating to see, and I'm hopeful that as a society, we do get these things right. And I mean, it's fascinating that it comes at a time when, as a country and varying other countries are very much closely looking at, well, what is the right approach to be able to control and legislate to solve some of these issues. But it's also an ongoing issue with technology, right? AI, you could argue in varying areas has similar types of challenges where it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. And what's the right way to manage that? Should it be legislated? Should it be through education? And usually these things tend to be a combination, right?
No, I think it's that point around even if we do go the wrong way, how do we course correct? So if things aren't going the right way, it's not like let's just keep going. Let's take a minute and see if there's a way where we can improve the situation. Yeah.
Now, also, I guess also crossing into the meta camp, I saw Gizmodo published an article, and that was focused on a comment that smart glasses companies are getting shamed into covering up the cameras. Now they talked at a particular vendor there who are launching the Inmo Go 3, and it has a camera cover now, and that's something that we haven't seen in smart glasses. Commonly, if we look back to the Google Glass days, and I think the wearers of Google Glass must be going back in the direction of a decade now.
Must be.
They were commonly called glass holes. So it wasn't really well. It wasn't something that really impressed people to see somebody wearing these glasses, and now Meta are facing a class action lawsuit alleging that their smart glasses have misled users around privacy protections, with claims that recordings and data collection were not, completely disclosed, and this has basically led to some pretty significant issues, shall we say? And delving into that, they had people reviewing content. And those people reviewing content were seeing anything that somebody might see while they're wearing their glasses, whether it's a set of glasses that have been taken off and left in a bathroom unattended while someone's having a shower or whatever's going on in there, through to things that might happen in a bedroom and so on, that would horrify people to know that this sort of content might end up being viewed by someone. So quite significant risks, I think, of this, and that's just without even dealing with individuals maybe wearing a personal, I guess you could categorize it in the bring your own device category, when folks are wearing these personal glasses and walking into a corporate meeting or any other situation that probably shouldn't be recorded on a personal device, but may end up getting captured and recorded and leaked and whatever else.
Yeah, it's funny. We were saying before the show, like reminiscing about the Google Glass. There's an element for me about, I was almost disappointed that the use case that had emerged, and I think ultimately was probably contributed to the demise, was the recording, the being able to take photos and videos. Whereas for me, it was always about the heads-up display. Like that's the sci-fi kind of futurist part that I'm like, that's what I want. I want the heads-up display. I don't care about recording. But I think there is this broader piece, and I think in the Reuters article was talking about the adjusting to social norms about recording. And I think that's something which is a reality, because we're all carrying devices that have microphones in them and they can capture things in 4K. And the fact that that's becoming less obvious if I am recording you, because did you see that the little light was blinking on my glasses, is just the latest evolution of that. I think a bigger question that we're going to have to ask is, of these capabilities that are out there, which are the ones that we want to be leveraging? And then what is the social pressure that says, okay, cool, I can see there's a light blinking, all the rest of it, but actually don't turn that capability on, or don't even put that capability in the devices, because then I can't trust that you're not going to use it, or someone isn't going to, not you, Paul, you'll be fine, but someone is going to misuse it. So I think that like I say, disappointed that that's the thing that gets the attention, whereas I was really excited, still am excited seeing some evolution in the heads-up display category, and as someone who has worn glasses for many, many years at this point, I love that. I'll bring that on.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's a great perspective, and we have to keep sort of stepping back and looking at what are the positives that we can get out of the technology, but how do we manage and to minimize those downsides. And sometimes the downsides are just baked in. Sometimes there are probably approaches that could minimize or avoid the downsides from a design perspective. And I think there is a bit of a societal journey in some of these areas, and I think smart glasses are one of those areas where when we start hearing around these extreme scenarios of things being recorded that really shouldn't be, and then potentially getting seen by folks, you recognise maybe we do need some better limitations here, and if some of these use cases are legitimate, then you also get into questions around, well, who would we trust this sort of technology to? And I think we do see a bit of a move to even things like home surveillance cameras, to folks being much more comfortable with something where the storage is local. It's not sitting in the cloud where you might not know what happens. That said, sometimes with local storage, that's not done too securely either, and you might end up with surprises there. So there's certainly some complexity.
Indeed.
Yeah. Now, also on this, I guess we're talking a lot of sort of safety and concerns front. The BBC and others have been delving into risks around roadblocks. Now, this is a platform, probably, many parents think of as, this is this great platform that, keeps my youngster occupied for, depending on the age of your youngster. But I know, very popular in probably that 8 to 12-year-old age range, and some that would use it, well beyond that. But the BBC interviewed a developer who I think had worked for Roblox, and his commentary was basically that you should be monitoring your kids 24/7 if they're on the platform, and highlighting that the child safety measures on there don't go nearly far enough. And I think we've heard of some grooming and other sorts of things that sort of go on this platform, and it's not limited to Roblox. But I think it's important for us to be aware that these things that we think are, hey, this is a great safe platform for a youngster to be, it may not play out exactly as we expect in every case, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think unfortunately is exactly the right word there. I think it's one of these things where, again, the technology comes with, or all these technologies come with trade-offs. And I think the more explicitly we can steer into the trade-off and wrestle with it, the better. Obviously, with the case of Roblox, you've got this wild creativity, very, very wide remit for that. But then the downside to that is that some people will take that and use it in the wrong way. Realistically, monitoring your children 24/7 to be on something, I mean, there's screen time and there's other kind of restrictions you can put on phones, but everything is circumventable to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably more, for me, I sort of see this, like some of the other stories, as questions that are being posed to society at large for us to say, hey, okay, we've got this now. So this is not a theoretical question about, imagine if you had a world where you could create whatever you want. No, we have that. And we have, millions and millions of people using them. What do we want to do now? Where do we want to go from here? And I think that, oftentimes that is in the courts, or it's in the regulators and the legislators. But I think it actually just turns to us to a little bit more to go, well, hang on, do we want to shape this? Is this heading us towards the future that we like, or do we want to change the direction that we're going on? So, something like this, you can easily focus on the technical aspects. So age verification, well, let's talk about digital identity. Let's solve that particular problem. But I think many of them are symptoms of a wider problem, and the wider problem is actually a little bit harder to solve. So we like to fixate on the symptoms because they're a little bit easier to solve.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, so I think it's sparking the right kind of conversations, and then hopefully we can, from there, move to a better place than where we are today.
Yeah, and look, we have to recognise that issues that take place in a digital or an online context, they often mirror issues that are happening in
Absolutely.
broader society,
Yeah.
right? So, you're not going to solve all the issues in a digital context, just in the same way we're not going to solve all the
Oh, come on,
issues.
Paul, why not? Solve all the problems. Solve
in
all
a,
the problems.
in a non-digital context, there are still going to be, people that are going to get run over by a bus, whatever it is. There are going to be these things, but great to be having I guess more visibility to these sorts of issues, so we can find a way forwards. The a couple more things just on the international front to probably touch in on. Some risks around older phones. Now, this is not necessarily a new thing, because we probably, certainly listeners to the New Zealand Tech Podcast, would have a reasonable understanding that whatever technology you have, you should keep it updated and patched to stay secure. And if you've got an older device that can't be updated and patched, then you're potentially exposing whatever is on that device in terms of accounts and other bits and pieces to compromise. But this latest news that there's been this exploit kit that has been put out online and available for anyone to download from GitHub, that puts, I saw one figure saying maybe 20 to 25% of iPhones and iPads, potentially being vulnerable to this particular attack, that just requires somebody to visit a compromised website, and then the hacker could be gaining access to things like passwords and contacts and other information that's sitting on their device. So it's a real reminder of keeping current with things. In this case, really pleasing that Apple have pushed out patches for older versions of their operating systems that they may not normally be getting updates. So that helps. But I've also talked to some people that are like, I don't trust the company with their updates, so I'm not, I don't take updates anymore on an older device or what have you. So, I think we need to recognise the importance of keeping devices current and secured, and being aware that whatever you put on a device, there is some chance that it could get compromised.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Dark Sword, which is the name of the malware kit, I think it's something which reminds, especially when something like this is so widely available, so put on GitHub and easily accessible. It's not like you're having to trawl through the dark web to try and get access to this. But I think it's a good reminder that the we were talking before about trade-offs. The reality of the convenience that we have with these digital devices through our life, the trade-off is that you have to maintain them, and that does mean patching. And oftentimes, and I would expect, especially for listeners of this podcast, it disproportionately falls on people who have got a technology background to be the tech support of their less technically enabled family and friends. But it's really important, particularly when it's easy to exploit. I mean, this is this is out in the wild, and there's evidence of it being used in the wild as well, exploits that are available right now. So yeah, patch those devices, people.
Yeah, I mean, for all our listeners, whether it's within your home, family, friends environments, or whether it's within your organisation, it's fair to say that we have risks right across the board in New Zealand, and we need to be stepping up and doing more to resolve those issues. The percentage of folks who haven't done the basics yet is unfortunately still really high. And I think there's this sort of feeling that, there's nothing important on my phone, or what have you. But of course, if your account, your device, your whatever it is gets compromised, that can have a much broader impact, right? And if someone takes over your account or my account or somebody else's account, then we have a sphere of influence with others. We also will have probably private confidential emails, text messages, whatever with others. And so, we're not individual islands. We are well connected with other people. So if any of these accounts are compromised, then it's not just, that's a pity for me. Potentially has broader implications. And so, I think there is still a way to go for us in New Zealand to understand the impact, and we need to keep pushing these things forward. And I think our awareness is probably too low on some of these areas. We were talking around the smart glasses. I was chatting to somebody a while back in a tech firm in New Zealand, and they had mentioned that one of their team was coming into meetings, wearing these Meta, their private personal sort of Meta glasses,
right.
That created some issues, shall we say?
I mean, the multi-factor authentication, these other trade-offs that yes, they trade off convenience against better security. But I think it behooves us that understand these technologies more to help others understand why they're important and to put them in the context of the convenience that you have. I mean, if you lost your wallet or your handbag, or the inconvenience that would bring into your life, as well as the personal loss, is generally accepted as being a really bad thing. And so I think that on another level is what we're talking about with these exploits. The fact that they can be done remotely, and I think as humans, we're not very good with probabilities. So we're like, oh yeah, but it probably won't happen to me. When something like this is at this level, it's a really good reminder that, well, yeah, but it could, and why not just stop it before it can?
Yeah, there's probably a whole lot more down that track we could cover, but I'm keen to sort of delve a bit more into your work and what you've been up to, James. So,
sure.
Yeah, maybe tell us a little bit more around your journey at Xero. How long have you been at Xero now?
Gosh, it's coming up 7 years now.
Okay.
It's nearly 7 years. So yeah, I started at Xero 2019. So I finished at ASB when I was chief architect there. That's when the last time I was on the podcast, actually.
That's right.
And then started at Xero as the EGM for engineering and architecture. And then the organisation keeps growing, and one role becomes 3 roles. And so then I focused on EGM for architecture and integration, which was some of our mergers and acquisitions, but also integrating new technologies. And then EGM for technology strategy and integration. And then did that for a little while. And then about 2 years ago, moved into this role. Yeah. And so it's the first time, I think I was trying to tally it up there, first time in about 18 years that I'm not leading a team. So that's a trade-off again, a blessing and a curse. It's good having a calendar with a bit more space in it, but it means I've got no one to delegate to, so I have to do the work myself. And really just enjoy. Most of my roles for my career have been in engineering, architecture, strategy, innovation type roles. So I've always been oriented a little bit towards future-leaning type roles.
Yeah.
And this one really is leaning in on that as much as I can and seeing what I can do to help shape the preferred future for people in small business and their advisors and communities around the world, because the purpose at Xero is to make their lives better. And if I can have one small part to play in that, then all the better. So no, really enjoying it, and it's great working for. We're now like kind of an old tech company in New Zealand. We're doing 20 this year. Xero's 20th birthday this year.
Yeah,
so
amazing.
It's crazy to think about how far it's come from the early days of Sir Rod and the work that he was doing with the founders to where we are today.
Yeah, and I think Rocket Lab are in a similar direction. And there's probably 2 sides to that. On one side, it's like, oh, there must be some aspects of the technology that are maybe getting a little bit older. On the other side, with the sort of scale and so on, it allows you to do all sorts of things that wouldn't have been possible even 5 or so years ago, as Xero has really grown from, I guess, an entity that was always growing very, very quickly, but wasn't a profitable entity. I guess, Amazon been through sort of similar things in their journey to where Xero is doing pretty well out there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think
it's pretty incredible.
That's why, I mean, for me, I feel very, very lucky and honoured to have this role, and I think it comes from a desire, particularly in New Zealand, our home heritage market, and in Australia, just next door, where because we've been part of that ecosystem for so long, there are questions that people are asking us about, not just the great stuff we're doing in our product and the announcements we're making there, but also what's happening beyond that? Like, what's happening for the future of the profession, for people who are accountants or bookkeepers? What's happening for the future of small business? Like, Xero, you've kind of got an eye on this. And so for me to find myself in that point is a really, really great job.
Yeah. Well, those were things I was kind of keen to delve into, a little bit. Let's delve a little bit into the Xero and Anthropic announcement, and then, keen to hear a little bit more on your view on where things are headed.
Yeah, so we announced that we're doing a multi-year partnership with Anthropic, which is really exciting because it's an opportunity for us to use Anthropic's capabilities inside of the Xero product and platform, but also to allow people to use their Xero capabilities inside of Anthropic. And it's something which we sort of think about how we provide the best insights. We talk about being the most trusted and insightful small business platform. That's our vision. So how do we do that wherever people are doing work, and how do we meet them where they are with the best possible insights? And really, it's along this concept that we've been talking about recently about accountable intelligence. How do we ensure that we're providing the right insights at the right time and doing that in a way which is explainable and you can see how our tools and technologies have reached the conclusions that they have, and then empowering particularly the trusted advisors, which is what accountants and bookkeepers are for so many people in small business, to really help them, grow and achieve and do great things. So it's exciting. It's an exciting partnership that the team behind us has been working very hard on, and it's exciting to see where it goes from here.
And tell us about why Anthropic.
I think a lot of it was just looking. We have a model where we sort of assess the different capabilities that are available in the market and which are the ones that make the most sense and align with what we're trying to do at the time. And I think that would have been that what the team would have been assessing when they were sort of weighing things up.
Yeah, it certainly looks like a really smart move. And yeah, I guess there's that aspect of Xero in New Zealand. We kind of take Xero for granted. Like it's like, oh yeah, we've got Xero. Yep, Kiwi found a company with still a very big chunk of the Xero team being here in New Zealand. But I mean, this is a really significant announcement in terms of when are people going to sort of see Xero changing with this partnership?
I think it's starting to come online, and obviously as we're leading towards our XeroCon events, which will be in the middle of the year, there'll obviously be more announcements there around timing and when capabilities come online. Yeah. But you're right in the sense that I don't know about taking Xero for granted, but there's a part around we've got over 4.5 million customers globally now. We're used in over 180 different countries, and it's. I have to kind of check myself on that every now and then and kind of go, wow, it's not just like a little startup anymore. When the team were talking about, hey, it's 20 years this year. Yeah, there was a lot of like, woof, yeah, wow, it really is. So that nature of we take our role in the ecosystem very, very seriously. We take the trust that's been built in our platform and built in the relationships that we've been able to build. We take that very seriously. And so we look at partnerships like this and other things that we do to try and extend and enhance that, trust and insight.
Yeah, it fascinates me. And we had, I've had varying discussions. We did a podcast with one company that were like, oh, we're like Xero, but we're all in on AI and AI insights. And, very interesting to sort of see the newer companies come through to look at Xero, which, now is a behemoth and yeah, to at times sort of wonder and think, oh, is Xero still an innovative company? And I think when you look at a company that's sort of very new, you're seeing all the new the new features and things get built out that need to get built out. There's a degree to where Xero's kind of done most of that building out over the last 20 years. But of course, we all have our things that we're like, oh, why doesn't Xero have this? Why doesn't Xero have that? And so there are those sort of aspects that I think, some people look at and go, what's Xero up to? But this is certainly, one that I think a lot of those who use Xero will be very, pleased with. And, I think it's a really strong move.
Yeah. I hope people are pleased with it as well. I think as we started down that path, even when we launched JAX, which is Just Ask Xero, which was our kind of foray into generative AI anyway, because I like to point out, the story with AI and Xero goes almost right back to the beginning. We often, and you and I have spoken about this before, it's people shortcut AI as being the last couple of years, like that's AI. Yeah. Whereas, Alan Turing's paper, I think, was 1950. I think, we've been on this journey for 75 years. And so Xero hasn't been on it for the full 75, but for pretty much most of our existence, it's been leveraging those capabilities in a way that can unlock new utility for our customers and our partners. And so innovation, I think I probably said it the last time I was on the podcast, because I say it every time anyone asks. The definition of the word is to create something new in order to change something established. It's not just invention, which is creating something new. It's changing something established. And so when we look at the changes that are going on and what's established about how we do things in the modern world, we have to be leveraging that to ourselves as well. And that's what partnerships like this are about.
Yeah. It's going to be really an interesting one to sort of experience and see how how Xero evolves in this way, and opening it up to everyone, I think is really exciting. An accountant I was speaking to a while back was telling me how he was able to extract data out of Xero and put it into Claude, and just how amazing it was in terms of being able to create some of the reports that might have taken one of his team members a fairly chunky amount of hours to do, and just how well Claude was managing that. So.
And we saw that with the reason why we called Jax Just Ask Xero is because a lot of it was exactly that. Can I just ask how many unpaid invoices have I got? Now I can go find that. I can find the report and I can generate it.
Yeah.
But I just want to ask and get the answer. So I think this is the capability unlock that's really interesting. Is if you think about traditional programming and software development, is trying to anticipate a customer's needs and then provide a pre-made solution to that need. And sometimes you hit the mark exactly right, and sometimes you're a little bit off. For people, I wish it could do A, B, or C. And so I think that's what's fascinating to see for our incredible product and tech engineering teams, how they're leveraging these tools to enable them to hit more and more of those requirements. But also on the other side, from a use standpoint, how do you actually meet that need as close to the question as you possibly can? And so it's really exciting times.
Yeah, I remember when I tried out Jax. I can't remember, all the things that I've kind of thrown at it, but it didn't seem like a fully satisfying experience. Put it that way. So I guess seeing things evolve. Seeing what might be possible with I guess Claude in the background there, the Anthropic and Claude, how much that will advance things. And I guess you have that challenge that you don't want to be hallucinating kind of results. So you've had to kind of keep, I guess, framed what you can actually deliver, because we don't come to an accounting system to kind of get some random hallucinated result. We need to have absolute confidence in what's coming out when we deal with AI, which this is a challenge generally. But I think when you go to a system of record like Xero, you can't have it sort of spitting out some random thing that's telling you that the a non-existent or a wrong client kind of owes you money, or giving you advice that's actually going to tank your business rather than help it to.
The accuracy is non-negotiable, I think, is the way we phrase it. And I remember when Jax first launched, this is going back a couple of years now, and Jax Assure, which was our control platform behind the scenes that would kind of constrain what Jax could actually do. It meant that Jax was not very good if you asked for a cooking recipe, but very good if you asked about what invoices were, because it was grounded in that context.
I'm not sure I tried it on the recipes front.
And I think that as the team and as these capabilities have gone leaps and bounds, I was going to say every year, but it's actually not every quarter or every month. It's like week by week these new capabilities come on board. Something like this, like the Anthropic partnership, enables us to unlock that next level of capability while still keeping things grounded in that system of record that we have become. And even in that, I like the team we were talking about it the other day, and they were saying it's really more about evolving from being a system of record to like a system of action. So how do we start to enable more of the right kind of actions to be taken with the right kind of insight at the right time? And the ability to serve more of those needs than ever before is basically us seeing what people in small business are seeing, that these technologies enable you to do more. They augment your capabilities to deliver. And that's a great thing.
So in addition to insights, what sort of actions would you expect to see most small businesses being able to have the platform sort of do on their behalf? Because there's a little bit of a balance, right, in terms of how much do you hand over to get the technology to do for you, and how much do you want very close oversight on?
Yeah, so I think that while we look at the partnership being announced this week, obviously we don't have a specific timeline yet on when things come online, but the team are always looking at it through that lens of where does it make the most sense to leverage any capability that we have online. And so if I take an example inside of where we are today, something like automated bank reconciliation. So the early days of Xero, that was the real killer feature, was you could make bank reconciliation, not painful. In fact, it could almost be a little bit fun. You could complete things and get through them. And we've continued to enhance that with more and more machine learning as things have gone along. Now you get to a point where with automated bank rec, it'll turn around and say, here, I've had a go at pretty much doing the whole lot for you. And this is where the accountable piece comes in. Let me explain why I've reached this conclusion. This one's off previous behavior, or this one's off a rule you said, or this one's off a prediction, but I might have got it wrong. And so it's going through and being able to see the actions being taken place. I didn't need to go through and click OK 200 times. And instead I can look through and go, I'll just correct that one. I'll just adjust that one, and here we go. So I've found that when I use the product myself day to day, I'm like, this is great. It's done an action for me, but it's still leaving me in control, right? I'm the one who can still go through and check and then hit the final okay.
So how do you use it? Have you got a sort of a small business or something that
yeah, I mean, also for like I just like to use the product. So for family, family reconciliation of bank statements and things like that. Perfect. I was using a very old version of Microsoft Money. If you want to go back, like I think they sunset it in 2005. Yeah. And there was an element of, when I started at Xero, I'll avail myself of our own product and see what we use it for. So if it's sort of family affairs and things like that, and little businesses here and there, little side hustles.
Yeah, cool. No, that's good, because I think there's a lot to be said for, what's the term, eating your own dog food,
drinking your own champagne. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Whatever terminology.
Well, and I think it's because the geek in me, the architect in me, the technologist in me wants to understand the tech and understand what it's capable of. That really much drives my philosophy around how we approach even things like futures thinking, right? So we're talking before the show about strategic foresight, which is that's the term I really like for thinking about the future, because it's trying to look at the future in a way as something that you can shape. Yeah. And if you're going to shape it, you really need to understand what the capabilities are right now, as well as the capabilities that are potentially coming online. And then how do you stitch those two things together into a future that you prefer? And so that's been my more recent realization of justifying why over the years I've always been tinkering and having the labs and all having the different tech, is to understand what it can all do.
Yep. In terms of your view on Xero's role within New Zealand, we have this challenge. It's a long-standing challenge from a productivity perspective. What do you think Xero's role is in kind of helping us make New Zealand more productive?
Yeah, I was actually watching another podcast with Sir Rod was on there, and he was being asked a similar sort of question, and he had some really great thoughts based on the work he's been doing and his philanthropy and the work he's been doing in Queenstown. But what I loved about what he was saying, and I was reading online recently, Bo and Pan and a few others who have come back to New Zealand and are like, the productivity challenge, like how do we just make it amazing? And I think one of the things that Xero has been able to do is to contribute to that, both in the sense of helping small businesses have more time and being able to then deploy that time where they want to deploy it, which is something that I think everyone I've ever met in small business would wish they had more time and have more available. So there's like a direct intervention there, which is the more we can enable small businesses and the productive parts of the economy to have more time to be more productive, win. Beyond that, though, there's a whole ecosystem that is built on and around Xero, and being built by people who Xero alumni, who have gone and done their own things as well. And so I think New Zealand, Rod was referring to a phrase that I think it's either he who coined it or Craig Hudson, our former country manager, who said, we're just a small set of rocks in the South Pacific. Yet we've been able to achieve some of these incredible things when we set our minds to it. And so I think Xero can offer both a proof point of that, which can be inspiring to the next generation coming through, as well as have the more direct kind of interventions and powering of the ecosystem itself. But it's really quite impressive what the country's been able to achieve and what Kiwis can do. So let's do more of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the role of Xero, it is hard to sort of underestimate. Because when you see something, when you taste it, something that works well and makes a difference, then it gets you looking, well, where else can I do something similar? And there's certainly, obviously been, you talk about alumni and so on, people that have come out in Xero and varying things. And the good things that we've seen in Xero have inspired a lot. So I'm certainly looking forward and hoping that sort of the next generation of what Xero can do will be pretty cutting edge and help inspiring more good things ahead. Anything else that you want to add before we finish up?
I think we've sort of covered most of it. I think it's an exciting time. I think with a lot of these technologies, for those of us who have been in the technology game, if you want to call it that, for a long time, I remember 4 years ago, all I was being asked about was, blockchain and NFTs and cryptocurrency. And
Yeah.
3 years ago, all I was being asked about was the metaverse, And then 2 years ago, this sort of people started asking about AI again. And then the last year, it's really been about agents. And I don't know, next year it might be robots, and then we'll get into quantum computing. The technology keeps moving and shifting and changing. But I keep coming back to, it's a great opportunity for all of us, all of your listeners and people who are in the tech community in New Zealand to really go, hey, this is a fascinating, amazing time that we're in right now. What do we want to do? What do we want to do to shape the future into a way that we prefer? And so I'll do whatever I can to do that with the team at Xero. But I think more broadly in the community, it's just a great time to really lean in and help our friends, family, colleagues who maybe aren't as technically literate to be able to say, hey, here's the opportunity. Yes, there's a lot of questions, and I understand and I can see where some of the fear is coming from, but hey, look at the opportunity. Let's go after this.
Yeah, plenty of opportunity, and look, great to catch up, and I think to take a bit of inspiration from Xero and from your insights. So yeah, thanks for joining me back on the New Zealand Tech Podcast, James.
A real pleasure, Paul. I'll try to make it sooner than 6 years before the next time, or 8 years before the next time.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening in. Of course, a big thank you to Fortinet, Workday, Spark, 2 Degrees, 1NZ, and Gorilla Technology also for their ongoing support of the show. If you've been listening in to the audio, make sure you're following us also on the video platforms, and if you've been catching some of our video, make sure you're following us there on the audio front as well. That's us, and we'll look forward to catching everybody again next week. All right, see ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.